Hey, Barry.
Hello.
Hey.
Sam, here is your reminder. Start Zoom. Sam, here is your reminder. Start Zoom.
Was it Alex who actually started a session earlier this week on a non-weekend day?
It was Joel.
Oh, Joel. Did you go to that?
Yeah, I asked him, this is just before noon, and I said, did you have an agenda or topic? He said, no. So I clicked on it because I said, I have a half an hour before my next engagement. Chatted with him for about a half an hour, but just the two of us. And he just started a session for no specific purpose, but we haven't chatted with Joel for quite a while on any of the GCC sponsored sessions. So
I thought I wasn't there, but I thought that he was at the unblocking about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
possibly, I don't actually keep a mental record of who's on every session, but possibly it was. I don't know. I just don't remember chatting with him for quite a while.
So what topics got brought up?
Just, what the hell's going on? And, our whole planet is out of control. Kevin Kelly wrote a book called Out of Control quite a few years ago. And I just sort of observe all the things that are happening, both locally and globally and everything in between. And I think the level of out of control is just amping up. We're getting more and more out of control at all levels of human society. The weather's out of control, the climate's out of control, the economy's out of control, the politics are everything's out of control, including just individual people, in my own local, milieu. Hi.
1 second, okay? Wait.
Hey, how you doing, Barry?
I'm all right. How are you?
I got a kid that wants to go to sleep, but she refuses to sleep. So, doing all right.
We live in stressful times for humans of all ages.
Yeah, and my hair keeps doing an alfalfa thing today. I don't know what this is.
I just got mine cut yesterday, finally, after I don't know how long.
I'm cutting this off. I've never had hair up here. I usually keep it bald.
You can always put gel on it if it matters.
I can put her spit on it, I guess.
Yeah, that'll work too, yeah.
Yeah, she crawled out of bed for the first time today. She just got up and crawled.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Motion.
Yeah, she learned to crawl. Like yesterday was her big, excuse me. Good yawn. So, yeah. So good in your world?
Well, I mean, things are dicey in general, just like I say, the level of weirdness is sort of amping up, and it's at all levels. There's local weirdnesses and issues, and there's always something happening that you didn't anticipate, you got to deal with. And the thing is that you kind of rely on predictable patterns in your life that are nominally, don't modulate very much, but the patterns are just very wild and increasingly unpredictable. You just froze. You're back, or maybe not.
I don't know. Let me know if I'm back.
You're back.
I can hear.
So And
But when
people,
you
I
say
think people,
unpredictable, because I'm curious what metrics what's throwing you off in the system of unpredictability in the world right now?
people having emotional outbursts is too strong a word, but emotional perturbations, which are a little bit, 95th percentile, and above. My friend Anne Marie, her adult daughter had a psychotic break and had to go to the psych ward. And in the process, I don't know what the hell set her off. Well, sort of know what set her off, but she just, went over the cliff. And, Putin's, doing God knows what he's what's going on inside of his head. There's Stacy. So, just dealing with issues where you haven't a clue what the best practice is. It's such a gray area of unpredictability that, and of course, that's when you make mistakes because you don't know what the right thing to do is. So more often than not, you do something that's suboptimal.
Hey, shh, 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 shh. And there's also stress on top of stress on top of stress on top of stress.
Right. What happens is the person
This week too.
the person who's most susceptible to stress acts out. So the next level up, they've got to deal with that. So now they're acting out of pattern, and it just sort of escalates, ripples out like ripples in a pond, the level of stress, and pretty soon it's all the way up to global levels of what the fuck is going on the planet.
Yep, and you add the drugs onto it. A lot of people are on medication.
Yeah, there's several stories today about drug, like West Point cadets all got, I don't know what, fentanyl or some, I forget which one it was. People are not unknowingly, taking these really dangerous drugs like fentanyl, which they lace it into less problematic drugs. And so you got all this stuff, the prescription drugs, OxyContin, and the illegal drugs. And it just ripples up and down, it's splashing around in this big sea of troubles. And you look around and you go, how can I function in this? I keep getting disrupted by these dysfunctional perturbations. And no matter how well adjusted you are, you just shake your head and go, I have no idea what's the best way to handle this. He froze again. You're freezing about every 3 minutes there for half a minute. I don't know if you can even hear me say that. I'm pretty sure he knows he's frozen because he doesn't see us either. I think it's bidirectional freezing.
What started this topic?
Oh, just because Sam ran off to talk to your friend there, and so I just let Josh in, and we said, "What how are things in your world?" Weird.
But you mentioned you mentioned stress, and then you mentioned the level above that deals with the stress. Was there a particular situation that you were thinking of?
I mean, I have particular situations in my own life where I can sort of experience the stress, from the inside out, from the outside in, and I go, everybody's got to be feeling this because there's nothing unique about my situation. And when people are under stress, they will talk to their friends or their, confidants about it. And so even if you don't act out the stress, you're discussing it, and people become more and more concerned and, more and more disturbed. And that takes away from just your routine everyday functioning.
So it was just hypothetical. There was no situation that came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, Anne Marie up in Canada, her
Yes.
adult daughter had a psychotic break and is in the psych ward. And I just learned about it this morning. Then,
Was that the first time?
I don't know if it's the first time, but because I haven't known her for that many years, but her adult daughter has some kind of schizoaffective disorder. I don't know the exact diagnosis, but she's basically needs to be on constant supervision, or else she has to be institutionalized.
Now, I was just responding because I came on and all I heard was And then at one level of stress, then the next person has to react.
Oh, yeah, that's a general observation.
Well, so my point was, which I had said on a different call, that's really the crucial point. Because so you have the person acting out
Right,
who's not in total control for whatever reason.
right.
How they're reacted to is almost even more important. And that's where sometimes we slip up
Right.
because we're not centered. If we can really be grounded, then when we're hit with that person going through crisis, by not overreacting and
Yes.
by kind of like neutralizing whatever energy is being, pushed out,
Right.
we can make a difference.
I mean, it's like, what do you do with aggression? Some people react to aggression by pushing back with equal and opposite force. Other
That's
people
wrong.
just sort of vanish into the woodwork and disappear, go on hiatus. And between these two options of engaging or completely disengaging, either way, it's a disruption.
But there's a third option. It's not either or.
Yeah, there's a spectrum. It's two extremes.
Right. So
One
again,
extreme is run away. When, my great grandparents who came from Kiev I think in their late teens, early 20s, they got the hell out of Eastern Europe in the 1880s. Now you got 2 million or 2.5 million people, getting out of Ukraine. Here we are, 140 some years later. It's the same pattern. Some people stay and fight. Some people get the hell out of there. My great grandparents got the hell out of there as young people and came to Omaha, which is why I'm named after them. And I look at this and I say, well, if we're in a battlefield, I want to go somewhere else on the planet. I'm not cut out to be a warrior. And even if I were, I don't think it's a constructive. Basically, it's like they're monsters. You gotta annihilate them. I think that's a bit, game-like to think that way, but a lot of people do. You think, somebody said, how's this thing going to end? That's the question. How's it going to end? And I said, the only way I can envision it ending, if I were writing the story, is Putin comes out of the KGB in the Soviet era, which is now the FSB, the Federal Security Bureau. And the only way I can see it ending is that either one individual or a group of individuals in the FSB do what happened in Julius Caesar. They just say, this guy has gone off the rails and everybody's going to lose. Let's take him down. That's the only way I can see it ending, is if the insiders either martyr themselves or pull a Shakespeare Julius Caesar, and I don't see any other way to stop it. And that's just from literary ideation. But it's also like Murder on the Orient Express. They all done it. So maybe a whole cadre of people in the FSB will say, we have to snuff out Putin or none of us are going to have a future.
Well, welcome to Kayla and Colin and Alex. Alex has his hand up. Alex, you're on mute.
No, he wasn't on mute. You're just talking low. You're not on mute, but it's very low.
Can I turn my volume up?
Turn it up.
Yeah, your mic sensitivity is super low.
It's not actually raining there, is it?
The diplomacy is the answer to the aggression when there's war breaking out, because the offense must be pushed via aggression, via the invading forces. So that's not on because of the violence involved. They must be forced to come to the table and use diplomacy. So it's up to us to talk to our local member. It's we're the voters. We put them in power.
I guess the will and the intent to apply diplomacy still requires a lot of preparation and a lot of readiness and a lot of maturity.
True.
Yeah.
I mean, if all sides are willing to send the diplomats to a conversation, that's actually a pretty huge step.
Yep,
It takes a lot to get there.
yep. And there's still no guarantee that the conversation, the dialogue will yield anything in a finite amount of time.
Well, you know, Putin has said, yes, he'll come to the table, but here are the conditions before I do so.
Right. And we do the same thing. We also have
Yep.
preconditions. You know, the non-negotiable demands are not literally by definition not negotiable.
So let me introduce, through a number of different sources, a notion of violence that may or may not be useful. If you imagine that we're all able to coexist constructively and positively and thrivingly and resiliently, and we call that peace, then any deviation from that, let's say slight to immense, you know, immense being stuff like war and violence and murder, et cetera, et cetera. But along that dimension, if you say anything that deviates from an optimal peace coexistence is a form of violence.
Yep.
That might be a useful notion because people are not used to thinking of walking away as violence, of passive aggressiveness as violence, of even a slight raised eyeball as violence. You know, so imagine that, you know, a gesture that someone takes as accusing or negative or blaming or questioning detracts from that collaboration. It's a mild, you know, given other things, form of quote unquote violence in this notion, but it does detract from the peaceful, optimal coexistence.
Yep.
I'm just wondering whether that's a useful notion of violence. Over.
Alex, is your hand still up or is that from
I
before?
think that was from the previous.
Yeah, well, so then, then we have to ask, is violence ever good? Because the way you're describing it, I would say that raised eyeball could be a positive thing. If I see somebody doing something, it's one of you doing something, then maybe I'm gonna like give you a strange look. So you can call that violence, but it's a good kind of violence because it's like, hey, stop, think for a minute.
I would say that's not then, because that's actually trying to get us back to a better coexistence.
Yeah, minimum
I under-
intervention.
Okay, but
Minimum
here's,
constructive intervention.
if we want to approach things in a non-biased way, we have to recognize that to everything we put out, there's going to be that equal and opposite. So we can't say a raised eyeball is violence when you use it, but it's not violence when she uses it. It just is or it isn't, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not.
Yeah, I think this is one of those interactions. It's not just a property of a single entity.
Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Shakespeare.
It's the horse ran away story.
So maybe if instead of using words like violence, which have so many things attached to it, we looked like what would be the word you would use in physics in like a connection? What would be that word that causes a change or directs something in a different way?
A perturbation.
A dance. A dance is something in
that's the
between.
scientific word.
Godless.
I'm looking for a scientific word.
Godless. Yeah.
There is actually a term in electrical engineering. It's called impedance matching. Now, it would take a few minutes, and I probably wouldn't do a very good job of explaining what is meant by impedance matching, but it means that the energy that's coming in is captured without being wasted and turned into heat and without being echoed back, but captured perfectly to good function. So if you have a stereo amplifier and a set of speakers, the speakers have to be impedance matched to the audio signal coming in. Otherwise, you don't you're wasting energy or you're not getting the optimum output. So the concept of impedance matching is very powerful, very deep, very mathematical, and very arcane unless you're into electrical engineering.
Well, I've long thought that if we looked at communications that way, that would be a great start. But again, I don't have I wish somebody could simplify it, like how you would teach a first grader those things. It would help a lot.
I mean, we're talking about, at least college undergraduate concepts. And then once you have the mathematical concept of impedance matching in the discipline of electronic engineering, how do you take the metaphor? How do you take the analogy out to other cases like ordinary conversation, or, the pitcher throws the ball and the batter hits it. Well, when the impedance matches, you get a base hit. If the impedance doesn't match, you either get a strike or a foul or something other than what you're trying to achieve. So impedance matching, we could maybe try to figure out how to take the analogy, the mathematical analogy, and make it a poetic metaphor that other people would say, oh yeah, now I get it.
Sam?
Just interrupt there. I used to use the term impedance mismatching. I realized people didn't know what I meant, so I changed the word to alignment. Works a lot better.
So if I were to build on both what Colin and Barry both said, this, I believe, is what people mean when they say presence. In other words, you're able to receive everything that's being delivered with no loss.
Yeah.
Okay.
I disagree.
So that's one possible way to say it. The other notion that I'd like to say, since you wanted a mathematical explanation, Stacy, is if you look at the state of society, and no matter how you model it, in any kind of set of relationships, there's a stable point. Okay. And that stable point can be looked at as a point where you place a ball on a hill. Okay. And if we're stable, the ball stays there. But the minute you perturb, okay, you slide it a little bit to the side, it rolls downhill. Okay. Now that's an unstable stable point. Okay. That's a very vulnerable stable point. There's the other notion of stable point where if you actually put the ball at the bottom of a valley and you perturb it slightly, it's going to roll back down to the stable point. That's a much more resilient stable point. The stable point at the top of a hill is non-resilient. It's very vulnerable. So that's another way of looking at changes that sort of take us away from optimal.
Right.
That's also part of something that Barry will recognize as a perturbation.
Yeah.
And a whole class of things called perturbation theory.
Think of sitting in a saddle on a horse. A saddle is sloped downward this way, but upward this way. Because it's upward this way, it keeps you from going forward and backward when the horse speeds up and slows down. But if you lean off to the side, you're going to fall off. So it's unstable going this way, but this way, it keeps you going the same direction at the same speed as the horse.
So imagine.
Sorry, Stacey, just one more point on Barry's point, okay? And that's just in 3 dimensions. If you now say we got n dimensions where n is greater, much greater than 3, you have a very complex saddle. Where in different dimensions it's stable, but in other dimensions it's unstable.
Right.
That's what society looks like.
Yeah.
And those dimensions are called bias, and you cannot get rid of them. But how do you coexist with them?
I wouldn't say they're just biases.
They're feedback loops. You can have 2 kinds of feedback loops: stable feedback loops and unstable ones. If you turn the gain up too much on a public address system, it goes unstable. You get positive feedback. The energy increases, and so the notion of stable feedback loops is a very important and very technically subtle concept in engineering. And designing feedback loops that are optimally stable, they don't oscillate, they don't take forever. For example, if the ball rolling downhill, if you have too much friction, it takes forever. If you have too little friction, it's going to oscillate. And there's something called critically damped, where it gets there as efficiently as possible without overshooting. It doesn't take too long, doesn't overshoot. So under damping and over damping and critical damping is a recurring mathematical concept in engineering. The shock absorbers on your car, you want them to be critically damped. And that's a
Like-
mathematical calculation, which most people, they say, oh, I have a bumpy ride, I have a stiff ride, I have a bouncy ride. No, what you want is a critically damped. It'll go up and down once and then come to rest gracefully.
Great. Talk about resonance.
Yeah. So in music, music is the other way around. You have a music box like a guitar. You want the audio signal to bounce around and create fullness. And if on the other hand, if you have sound absorbing, the sound will come in and it'll be absorbed and you won't get any resonance. So you can imagine designing a musical instrument where you're trying to find the balance so that you get a nice, rich sound, but not too much echoing, too much sustain. So you're doing the same calculation
Much better.
in materials and sizes of music box cavities. A brass instrument has much more resonance than a wooden stringed instrument.
Alex, you've got a lot of background noise, Alex.
Is it
Raining
still
right
there?
now.
I just
still
turned the
there.
fan on.
It's still there. Hey, Barry, the point that I wanted to see if you could make was certain forms of perturbation actually amplify.
Yeah.
So in other words, to find the right resonance frequency, a small
Oh yeah.
piece of recurring energy can
Yeah.
actually add to a large potential effect.
Pushing the swing. Every parent knows pushing the swing. If you time your push right when the swing is high up, you can make it go higher and higher because each time you're adding to it. If you push at other times, you'll disrupt the resonant frequency, and the size of the swing determines the period. And so like a pendulum on a clock, you want to give it a little kick exactly once per swing. If you give it a kick too soon or too late, you don't get the nice pendulum.
You dampen.
So those are examples of resonance. You simply inject the right amount of energy at the right time.
Right. And that's a way of making that perturbation either efficient or non-efficient.
Yeah,
And
useful.
in music, you want it to be efficient, but in systems and control theory, that's most of the time dangerous. And the Tacoma Bridge is often the academic example of how resonance causes damage.
Exactly. This is a very important concept in engineering, but most people don't study engineering. And even those who do don't always get the deep idea. They may get the superficial concept of it.
Alex, you had your hand up?
There's a resonance when you're talking about another person's bias, because system thinkers or scientific people understand you encounter bias everywhere you look, especially dealing with other professionals and people, even non-professional people. If they are led to believe there's a way of understanding the influence and the importance of bias in other people's evaluations, then they come to better conclusions usually. But it takes a lot of thought, it takes a lot of experience, it takes years of practice to get better at that, because the knowledge you have deposited over the years of history and cultures has an impact on that. The knowledge of the way the media has affected the population and Hollywood. These are factors that come into it, and they have emotional aspects of it also that resonate with people's biases. So there's a resonation going on, a resonant frequency between the number of people who understand the importance of bias and how it affects people's thinking, trains of thought, and the people who don't understand it. So that addresses Colin's issue too, I hope.
I think I understand your point, but how is that resonance? I don't see that.
I'm joining the Colin's discussion about the bias influence with the talk that Barry brought up with the sound duplicating output and having the frequencies and all that exactly the same. You never get them the same. There's a movement in a speaker, and when the sound waves in the air, you remember that example on YouTube when they had all those metronomes in a room, hundreds of metronomes all together, and eventually they became synchronized.
Right.
Over.
Yeah. Resonance is a very powerful but subtle idea and not so easy to understand in terms of the underlying mathematics. You can observe it and go, oh, wow, that's really amazing. But to really understand it deeply so you can manage it, that's a graduate level challenge.
Colin's got his hand up. Colin, you're still on mute.
Yeah, this phone, it goes zip zag when you move it. Okay, so yeah, I appreciate the engineering talk about resonance, but that has to do specifically with wave theory. Resonance and waves go one and one. We're talking about people and bias. So waves and resonance, people and bias. So I like to follow up again what Alex caught what I said. And when you're looking at the system to understand the bias in a conversation, it would be nice to have some feedback, some observations of what the other person's theory of mind is. Now you can use a slider board to control the other person's theory of mind, or you could use a slider board to read the person's mind. First time I mentioned this to Barry, he got upset because, as he probably rightfully identified, a mixing board as something you control. And I meant for it to be a readout, but a two-way readout, one that you can adjust and tweak. So I think that idea needs some more discussion, but at the same time, this mixing board is a readout of the bias. And then you can see who you're talking to and why you're not getting through. Okay, go ahead, Sam.
Colin, can I ask you a pokey question?
Sure.
If you actually think that that sort of feedback is useful, there are sliders we already use. There's indications of facial features, there's posture, there's tilt of head,
Oh, yes.
there's, frequency of interruption,
You're talking
and you
language.
choose not to make those features visible. So
Oh,
if you believe that those features and feedback are useful, I find it curious that you don't provide them today, without the control board that you think is useful, but yet still needs to be created.
I guess my presence is different than what you're considering presence. I'm dealing with just ideas at this moment.
Yeah, but your conveyance of those ideas can also still deliver more information if we see more about you. Just like you can see, when I'm tweaked, I'm angry, or somebody else is fretting, or whatever, those are sliders in your world.
No, yes and no. Some sliders are not required. Some sliders should be filtered out. For example, anger. Yes.
How do you know what sliders are useful to me, or useful to Stacy, or useful to someone else?
Exactly. There's different pre-configurations for different conversations. If you're having a talk with your wife, yeah, turn on the screen. You're having a talk with somebody that you're writing a book, give them the book, let them read it.
Stacy?
Yeah, I'm curious. So I'm on camera. So what are you reading from me?
It's very evident, right? There's some times where people are walking around. There's some times where people are frowning. There's sometimes when people are listening rapidly. There's sometimes.
My question was, what are you reading from me
All
right
of that.
now?
All of that. All
What?
of that. I mean, look, it's not an
Not walking
uncommon.
around. I'm sorry, I didn't get an answer.
Attentive. You're
You
being
got
attentive.
exactly the answer, because this is exactly the point that Colin was making that I was trying to respond to, okay? Different people see different things.
So I'm asking you what you see with me, like in a word. Give me one word or two words.
I can see that your camera, for example, is tilted up. So I actually don't see much of the rest of your torso. Whereas, let's see, I've got my camera positioned. So, I mean, for example,
I'm talking about what do you see about me that would
What
be
about that
useful.
actually
That would be
is,
useful. That would be useful in your engaging with
I
me.
see that you're listening, but I also see that you're very intent on making a point. And I'm trying to make a point that you're not hearing.
Well, I'm actually annoyed.
Yes, I
And,
see that.
and
I see
clearly
that.
you didn't see that. No. I was
No.
annoyed before I started talking to you.
No, I just didn't say it.
Why not?
Why should I say everything that I see? I'd be going on
Because I
forever and I'd be
asked you.
monopolizing.
Wait a minute. Why? Because I specifically asked you. So why wouldn't you say?
So am
I
I
don't know,
obligated
Stacy,
to answer
it's-
every question that is posed to me?
Now he's annoyed.
if we're having a conversation and I very nicely, respectfully ask you, what do you see about me now? I would expect that if you actually can tell that I'm annoyed, you would say, well, you kind of look a little annoyed. Why is that?
Okay, Stacy, you're annoyed. Why is that?
No, that I'm on a different point now.
I know.
Oh, jeez.
Do unto others as they do to you, I guess.
Say it again. Colin?
Well, you asked Sam a question, he said no, then Sam asked you a question, you said no. And I'm just saying, sometimes it's really important to get all the language you can get, including body language, and sometimes it's good to filter out a lot of that shit so you can actually get meaning across.
And
Depends
I'm
on the
saying, what good is any of that if you're not taking in that information and using it in a way to help you communicate better?
I think Sam's very observant. I wouldn't worry about that, but definitely we get things wrong and we need to clarify.
This
Oh,
isn't a question. I wasn't saying Sam's not observant. That's not the point I'm trying to make.
He doesn't disclose what he interprets.
This wasn't even about Sam.
I don't know. I don't consider myself any good at reading body language reliably and interpreting state of mind. I consider myself terribly off the mark if I attempt to do
Okay, and that's probably accurate.
that.
And
And
also,
yet, it doesn't have to be assumed to be innate. It's a skill that people can learn, right? Just like most other skills.
it also explains why Barry would be disgruntled at the idea that I'm trying to play with theory of mind.
Oh, yeah,
Since-
it annoys the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Absolutely
so
sends me right up
I
the
would-
wall.
If I would have
Alex has his
known,
hand up.
if I would have known that, I would have approached our conversation differently. That's for sure.
Did you
I
take
can
my hand
see-
down? I didn't
I can
finish.
see a person's demeanor to a certain extent just by the visuals, but to see a person's feelings takes a lot of deeper consideration of what they're saying and they're conveying in the language. I think the language is tied to the visuals in a way that we process in our according to our own biases. Over.
Barry, and then can I change the subject?
Yeah, I wanted to double back to the real reason why I'm not fond of the slider model. The slider model is wonderful if your parameters are linear and independent, but almost nothing is linear independent. I mean, and your opposite example would be the whack-a-mole game. If it was linear independent, each mole would have a slider up or halfway up or down, and its up and down has nothing to do with any of the others. But in fact, there is an interdependence, a hidden interdependence, so that when one mole goes up and down, it affects two or three of the other ones in a way that's nonlinear, so that they're nonlinear and interdependent. And the slider model, you have to have some hidden mechanism saying this slider is not independent. If you move this one, it's going to affect two or three of them over there that you didn't even realize. That's why I don't like the slider model. It leaves out the most important phenomenon: interdependence, nonlinearity, and interdependence.
I don't think that can't be accommodated for in some way. But yeah, you can't accommodate it without the automation, as it's called, which is
You need the
functional.
mechanism. You need the nonlinear mechanism of the whack-a-mole machine, which is
Sounds like what I was interested in the emotional derivatives. Interesting.
Okay, Alex, and then I would like to change the topic.
I was just going to mention that I've seen a recording artist in the studio working in the studio, and the guy on the desk with the sliders would be moving several at once. He'll have both hands on the sliders, and he'd be moving several groups at once, changing the drums and the instrumentation and the vocals of other artists simultaneously, in a not one at a time, not mono, stereographic hi-fi. Over.
Okay, so the topic I would like to introduce, unless somebody's really burning to follow up on this previous one, I'll give you 10 seconds.
Sorry, was that for me?
If anybody really wants to follow up on this slider conversation.
No, I just think that it would be interesting to discuss it more because I think it includes a lot of the dynamics of what we're talking about.
All right, since you do want to continue, let me then give you my sense of it, okay? And
Sure.
that is, I'm kind of, I have never, and I'll use this word, resonated with the slider model because it is a finite, limited, linear, as Barry indicated, notion of indicators. And all those indicators are available in other ways. And they're often interdependent, as Barry also says. So what the sliders are really trying, in my opinion, to give you is ways to improve your own mental model on whatever you're observing, so that you can actually see, okay, is sentiment going up or down, assuming it's a one-dimensional thing? You know, is engagement going up and down? Is irksomeness going up or down? All those other things. But those are part of a mental model that may inform you in how you respond. And so rather than saying, okay, here's a finite list, I think what Barry and I would prefer to see is a better depiction of a mental model. Probably, you know, at least 2 or 3 dimensional and not just a bunch of single dimensional sliders.
Right.
So that's, I mean, I get the point that you're trying to make, Colin, because you do come out of music, and the control board is definitely a mixer metaphor. But I do see its limitations.
Okay, let me give you one example of a multi-dimensional interaction.
But wait. Before you do you understand what I'm trying to say? Do you understand what I and Barry are trying to say?
Totally. I understand. What you're trying to say is that it's too simplistic to capture the nuance.
Misleading model. It's a kindergarten misleading model.
Also, the misleadingness could actually be dangerous,
Yep.
as opposed to not having any information at all.
Right.
Because you're ignoring a whole set of other dimensions.
So this is what I'm saying is you only have so many to start with. It has to be a learning system. It's got to be a personal system that you share. Okay. It's not something somebody makes of you. It's something you share with somebody. And it also has been proven over time. It's been validated. You work towards it because you know people are watching. For example, resilience is something that would be a multi-dimensional variable. Resilience of what, right? Resilience of many different things. So let's just give you a simple example. If your anger goes up, does that affect you in a way where you become irrational, unable to continue with the conversation? Are you able to land the plane with people shooting guns in the back? Or are you just going to freak out and jump out with a parachute and say, screw all you people? Like these are multivariable dimensions that happen to be anger. The big 5 would be on there. And you're right. It is very difficult to imagine this, 10-dimensional system in a 2-dimensional slider system. So the reason I use the sliders is just to keep the idea simple. So people could say, oh, look, their anger's going up, and look, their patience just went way down. Now, maybe somebody's anger would go up and their patience would hardly move, right? Maybe someone's used to being angry. Like in software development, you got to be used to having difficult problems and being able to sit there and sigh a little bit and say foobar and keep going. Where other people say, I'm not doing this. How can anybody figure this crap out? So, you can't make one system. You're right. It has to be an intelligent system that learns. And so that when you're up against somebody, this person has a lot of resilience. They can deal with your anger and you've met your match. Or this person's flippant. Every conversation they have, they run away. They're too angry. Then there could be other systems, which is not really slider based, but where if you talk to it and you're angry, your words don't go through, or your words get filtered and played back and you hit reply yes because they're acceptable now. So if you say F this, F that, blah, 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 water is cold, then it might go through the system and say, come back, say water is cold. And you say, yeah, I'll send that. You see, so there's ways to filter feedback this emotion that's not necessary, and to track emotion that's part of somebody's character that I don't think should be removed. So I don't know. It's quite complicated. Yeah, I'm not thinking simply about this, or I would have already built a system, right? It's not easy by any means.
Okay, Stacy's hand is up. Thanks, Colin.
Yeah, I just heard one thing when Colin was talking that I hadn't heard before. So is this whole idea of sliders to control people's behavior?
Good question.
Yeah, that's what Barry assumed when we were first talking. The sliders are really gauges and you can adjust them. So you would have I guess you would have your own personal connection. If you think this guy's angry, like for example, you and Sam just did that, right? You asked Sam, what do you think I'm doing? Well, Sam would have had his settings on his side, his assumptions, he could, take notes. And then those notes are basically the sliders. They don't control
So are the sliders being used by the individual, or are the sliders being used by somebody outside monitoring the individual?
Then he could send that to you, and then you could verify, no, I'm not angry. What I am is this. Or you could say, no, you could verify it. So he could put it in a certain position. It gets sent to you in the background, so it doesn't disturb anybody else in the conversation. You starting to see my point? There's many levels to where this could be used. Interpersonal, or just if your application's even accepted. So, people will be filtered, and bias needs to be dealt with. Yeah. More upfront, what Sam would call transparent manner.
Sam?
So let me see if I understand right. What I'm hearing, especially with the anger example you used, Colin, is that if a signal is coming through and it's carrying what you would call a high metric on the anger dimension, one slider you would use would be to filter out that anger so that only the signal, the message itself came through and the anger was filtered out. That's what I heard you say, right? So it seems to me that slider board is on the side of the receiver, the listener.
Yes.
Okay.
There wouldn't be so much a listener. You could think of it like Amazon or Siri.
Well,
I mean,
the point is it's on the receiving side where you're actually trying to understand the signal better. So therefore your sliders, change some potentiometers, et cetera, and then something comes through eventually, right? So it wouldn't affect the sender, the speaker at all, right? It's only affecting the listener in that example.
Actually, no, because say the person, they both have a readout, okay? So the sender sees anger. The receiver doesn't see any anger because they have it filtered out. So then
the sender may not see anger, right?
Yeah,
your interpretation of something that comes across as anger may not have been sent as anger.
Exactly.
Well, it's the credit card company. They don't need your anger. They already know you're angry.
There is no anger at times, although you've interpreted it as anger.
But if it happens to be, for example, your spouse, you will have no filters.
See, Colin, here's what I'm saying, okay? Is that this is a almost very limiting and almost a defeating model because there are already indicators of that. There are visual cues, auditory cues, motion cues, frequency cues, engagement cues, pattern cues. They're all giving you this information already. And you don't need to talk about them in terms of sliders. In fact, sliders too much simplify them. And if you actually talk about, hey, there's a there's a tone of voice that's different, or there's a frequency that's different, or there's a word that's used that's different. Those are already indicators. So the sliders are indicators, and we're already getting lots of indicators.
Yeah.
So it's useful
slider-
to think of sliders, but don't push the metaphor too much, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, it's not, I don't think the end design will actually be sliders. I'm just using it as something simple so people can follow me along. But I can see that I need to have definitely the disambiguation put into the model so people don't think you're actually controlling somebody's, it could just be, as far as the receiver seeing, they're just seeing levels, like anger level, excitement level, knowledge level. What's this person's credibility? What's the premise? There's a premise. Oh, lost premise. Where's the bias on this premise? This is not just anger and emotions. This is context.
Alex? And then Barry?
Yes, there's a line between anger and happiness, similar to the line between pleasure and pain. It's a fine line. I think that if you've got a slider that's going to block out pleasure or pain or happiness or sadness or anger, it's going to have to be a very well-defined slider. It's going to have lots of graduations. And how will it know whether it's crossed the line or not? Over.
Well, let's just say that
Wait,
nobody gets.
Barry's hand was up.
It's a verification system. It's the same thing as making maps.
Barry's hand was up.
Oh, sorry.
The conflating an indicator with the controller is problematic for me. On the floorboard of your car, you have a slider. It's called a gas pedal. And it's a control. It regulates the amount of fuel being fed to the engine. You also have a speedometer on the dashboard. It's an indicator. You cannot grab the speedometer and pull it back. It's only an indicator. It doesn't respond. You cannot control it. On the other hand, the accelerator is a controller, but it doesn't determine the speed. It only partially determines the speed. So you really need to distinguish between indicators, which give you information. And so I can have on my hi-fi a dial, which is volume, and then I can have a VU meter, which is telling me the loudness of the music. But it's also mediated to be by the program, because if the program is silent, turning up the volume doesn't really increase the motion of the VU meter. And I can't grab the VU meter and turn it up and down. The indicators and controllers are separate entities. They don't necessarily have bidirectional control. They're feedback or indication, but each one doesn't affect the other. So you have a much more sophisticated model, and this conflating control and indicators just drives me up the wall, because it's as if you could grab your speedometer and slow your car down. You can't.
Actually, there are like directional controllers.
Sure, there are some.
Well,
They have to be wired up that way.
Well, it's just a matter of having the right bindings and software or whatever you need. The thing is, though, we're not talking about cars. We're talking about conversation, and we're talking about understanding, transference. We're talking about context. The control mechanism is just a way to talk about those things. And I think bidirectional control is a great idea, because that's what conversation should be. And Sam made the point, he doesn't feel he has the highest quality of bidirectional conversation if I'm not using the camera. He made that point. And I say, well, if I actually thought that he was losing any value, then I would turn my camera on.
Actually, I have indicated that, and the camera's still off. Stacy?
Yeah, I want to know what Kayla thinks. I
Not
can't
hearing
hear, you're
you.
muted.
You're unmuted, but we're not hearing you.
Yeah, your microphone seems to be off. See, those are good visual signals.
And see, Kayla wouldn't know. She thinks
And
she's
those are
unmuted.
ones that we respond to better.
As far as Kayla knows, when she unmuted, her microphone was feeding. We had to have the indicator that we're not hearing anything, and then diagnose that something's wrong with Kayla's microphones, and not her mute unmute button.
I guess while Kayla's trying to get on, I think the point I was trying to make before speaks to what Barry's saying now. It's really easy for us to react to Kayla to be able to tell her that something's not working, her microphone isn't on, but it's not so easy to react when we see that something else is off with someone. For me personally, I looked at it as there really wasn't that deep listening or deep inquiry that Sam talks about. I didn't see it. I mean, the whole conversation, I haven't really heard anybody say, well, why do you think that's a good idea?
Notice also that we saw Kayla attempt to speak. If her camera was off, we wouldn't even know if she heard Stacy say, I want to hear what Kayla
Hi.
has to say.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So tell us what you think.
I really wanted to hear what Sam had to say because I was kind of annoyed.
Annoyed
I
at what?
was really-
Annoyed at what?
but where the direction of the conversation was going. And it's because this morning when I tuned in, you guys were talking about Putin and what was going on in Russia and Ukraine. And so I got my tea leaves together and I went, oh, this is going to be a very interesting conversation. Let me just calm down a little bit because I got really excited about the opportunity to listen. And then it kind of shifted. And I'm not trying to say that it was unimportant, but I was trying to listen to everybody to see where the point was going. And I started to think that it was going round and around again. So that's my thought. So I tuned out a little bit so I could hear something that doesn't trigger or annoy me. So you're asking me what my thoughts about, and my whole thing was I really wanted to hear what Sam had to say or to propose. Thank you.
Thanks, Kayla. My response was I was suggesting a change of topic because I had also seen that this argument was just going to ping pong a bit. On the other hand, I didn't want to unilaterally change the subject if people still really wanted to talk about it. That's why I let it go. Okay. Now, the question I would ask at this point before going to my next topic is, Stacy, how come you were annoyed?
Because I didn't feel there was enough listening. I didn't hear anybody saying, what do you mean by that? Like, why do you think that? You know, it just, I don't know. It just felt like everybody just wanted to say what they think, which is fine. But,
Is there an example you can cite?
Okay. All the engineering talk.
Hold on,
Honestly-
I'm asking Stacy a question, please.
right now, I'd rather hear the topic that you were going to suggest instead. And I will, at a separate time, if anybody wants to talk about, like what, my specific example. But since I already know that Kayla is waiting to listen to something and you have a topic, I am happy to do that. I would like to do that.
Okay, so I'm taking a risk, but I'm going to make one small remark before changing topics, okay? I do believe that the topic went technical when you did ask about some of the mathematical words around certain things. I thought that was an invitation to get a little bit technical, introduce some of those notions, and that's why coherence, maybe not coherence, but resonance and some of those other control theory notions did get brought up. And I think at least what I could see is Barry and I did understand what we were saying on those points. And there are other points about sliders and indicators and visual cues, etc., that were following up on those points. So I'm not sure I could identify where some of that non-listening was happening. So
what about, I'm sorry, so what about even asking me why I thought that? Like, why was I even going in that direction?
Well, couldn't we answer your question and then get around to that? Because we're still trying to answer your question.
No, because we got on to really, the first thing, that Barry said is that you couldn't do that unless you were in a graduate level. That was, so that was like, just a statement like it couldn't happen, which I don't think is true at all. I think you could introduce it on a kindergarten level. I mean, if you have a container and you fill that container up and now it's overflowing, there's a problem. Now, how do you get the water back into the container? I don't mean to make it about this one situation. That's why I don't want to belabor it. But the reason that I am even interested at all is because we started talking about stress and we started talking, it was about people acting out. And I'm more concerned in the second tier of how people react to that stress so they don't amplify it. So that's where my interest was. And that's, you know, at the core of everything that I started to talk about. So I'm complete for
By
now.
the way, Stacy, recognizing that is why I introduced the word resonance. Resonance amplifies that effect.
I don't think I'm speaking about resonance. I think so in my mind, when I see it, I think of like, picture a water pipe and the water could be either rushing really, really fast or it could be going really slow. I'm looking at whatever word would speak to that mechanism, because that's where I think we can move the sliders in a different way, thinking of sliders in a different way. That's where we, you know.
Okay, so may I introduce that other topic now?
Yes.
Okay, and I will remember to follow up with you later, Stace.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to send around the link. The link, and some of you may have seen it because it's been posted widely. I think I've also posted it, is several minutes of a Russian captured soldier speaking about the war. And it's very powerful. He basically is acknowledging the injustice of what he and his comrades were actually asked to do in this war. Has anybody not seen this video?
I haven't seen it.
I'll say, I have the longer version that has the two other captured people. I want to share something about that with you when you finish.
Okay, so I do think that it's well worth watching. Now, I'm not saying this is representative of all Russian soldiers, but I think it is a very powerful position for this one soldier to have taken. The other thing that I heard is many of these captured Russian soldiers, they fear going home. They fear being sent back because they say they'll be executed because they failed. So there's a lot of dynamics here. Now, I don't know, whether or not this is well planned or whatever, but, I've heard these convoys, these 40-mile convoys are running out of gas. How could you not plan for gas and food in an endeavor like that? Unless you thought it was going to take, 30 minutes and it would be over with?
Bingo. Bad modeling.
Or you're planning on nuking.
Well, if he was planning on nuking, would he send all of his army to the place you're actually going to send a nuke?
No, he's not that stupid.
No.
So I just thought it was a very powerful statement by a Russian soldier that I recommend each of you view. And again, I'm not saying this is widely held or whatever, but it's very compelling. And Stacy, since you have seen it, I'd be curious what you thought of it.
Well, I saw it with the two other prisoners as well. I thought it was very compelling, so much that now I think I mentioned that I have a Russian friend who is, very pro-Putin. She's convinced that everything is propaganda on our side. So I did send it to her and I asked her if she could just verify that the translation is correct. Because I want, we have been having an open conversation. I'm very happy about that. I want to keep those lines open. And she came back to me telling me that it looks fake, that the people don't even, it was really total disconnect. It was like talking to like the most hardcore kind of Trump supporter. It's that same personality. She said that at one point she said they don't even look they look Ukrainian, not Russian. I didn't know what to do with that because anyway. So she just said, and then so my point is that it was so clear to me that once people have a real strong opinion, they're not changing it. So no matter what I show her, she's going to think it's fake. Now, we've already agreed that, there's propaganda and what to watch out for. And I'm going to try to figure out if I have this video of, she's a journalist. I think her name's Kim Iverson. Does that sound right? Well, she has really debunked some of the propaganda on our side. And I had put it in one of my private groups and the person came back, yeah, this is really informative, but why should we trust her? Who is she? Blah, blah, blah. And I wrote back, like, these are great questions. So let me tell you why I trust her. So I put up her Wikipedia. She's been an award-winning journalist for a long time. The way she presents is very calm, very measured. There's no theatrics, so I don't feel like there's bias. The way she was speaking, she said, most of what I'm debunking is on the American side, but only because I haven't had as much access to the propaganda that's going on the Russian side, but she knows it's there. And then I went on to say that people I trust her. I trust what I see. I haven't seen any consistencies. And the last part was some of the examples that she brought up were ones that I personally had that red flag go up on and started looking into, but then I was like, I didn't want to go down a rabbit hole. So that's what makes me trust somebody. It's a combination of all those factors. Am I going to trust everything? No, but I can't debunk everything. Everything can't be fake. So.
And how
Yeah,
would you
thanks.
take? How would you take?
Alex has his hand up.
And Colin had a question too.
I had a feeling that Putin went into Ukraine because he was upset at over a decade of insurrection and splinter groups, neo-Nazi, white supremacist rebels, and trying to cause problems, interfering with the Ukraine government, trying to take over and allow NATO to move in there and muscle it right on Russia's border. So I think he got sick and tired of that bullshit and just moved in with his troops. He's decided to clean up the mess. Over.
Thanks, Alex. Colin?
Yeah, Stacy. So I guess what I'm saying is back to the idea of how you would deal with that bias in a conversation. You'd have to take a note, and if you tried to verify that note, you wouldn't be able to validate it. They would say, no, you're wrong. That's a fake. And you could say, well, so you could verify that it's not fake. What would it take? How much effort would it take to change that person's mind? That's one criteria. Is this person too biased to even, your payback on effort is going to be very low. The cost of trying to convince this person is going to be very high. That's another parameter. And that's just for that one particular topic and that one conversation. Different conversation about what's the best kind of protein, they might be the smartest person on earth.
Well, so here's the thing, Colin. I'm not trying to change her mind. What our conversation is now about is how do we pick out propaganda?
Yes.
Because we both agree there's propaganda. So how do we learn to see those red flags and check further into it?
Right. So now you're kind of going back and automating the process through feedback. And you might, because you're aware that things are complicated, you find out a piece of information and it might affect 2 or 3 things that you're thinking. So you have to take a note of those things somehow. And these
computer's never going to help me to do that.
No, well, if you tell it to, it will, but if it has to know that you're asking it, it will present it to you. Is this a bias? Is that a bias? It'll go figure it out. Things are going to be verified. It's going to get harder and harder, I think, to control the story. We're just now in a lull. Sort of when the internet got first built, there was no security whatsoever, right? And then they said, oh, geez, a lot of people are using it. We're going to put some security on it. And then they got Web 2.0. Oh, everybody can be their own broadcaster now. Oh, we're going to have to put some security on who can say what. So now Facebook and places are, what do they call it? Erasing people? No, what's the word? I can't remember. Canceling people, yeah. So the next stage is going to be, once we get that validated, we'll be self-canceling with the sliders.
Sam?
So Stacy, I caught that you do bring up this topic of propaganda. And I want to bring up a name, because to me, this person is one of the worst propagandists. Have you guys heard of this woman named Brigitte Gabriel? I'm not sure how to pronounce her first name. Brigitte Gabriel. She, I think, is an ex-Middle Eastern woman who's now in the United States. Extreme pro-Trumper. Extreme in her delivery of a lot of Trump-based, almost Putin, I believe, also based propaganda. Definitely anti-Biden. So that's another source that I find very curious, you know, that she's got such buy-in. She's got lots of followers from the pro-Trump crowd. And when I respond to any of her posts, I get slammed by, you know, many others who are her followers. But occasionally I do respond to some of those posts. Anyway, in propaganda, she's one of the most influential, it seems to me, on the pro-Trump side. Over for now. Okay, since there's silence, may I introduce another topic?
Please.
One of the things that I've been tracking as a large, long-running arc in GCC conversations is this notion of critical thinking, of well-formed thought, possibly even the scientific method, possibly even having to do with things like emotional intelligence, with model-based reasoning, with mathematics, with symbols, with understanding probabilities, with understanding significance, with understanding what, you know, P and the tail phenomena are, and what constitutes certainty levels. To me, this is a very, very, to me, productive topic for GCC, because it actually does lay a playing field for how we engage. If we choose to apply critical thinking, then there are certain of these practices, certain of these insights, certain of these skills that we may want to see more of. And so that's a topic I'd like to bring in, especially with, and the reason I bring it up this week is Barry's post on the characteristics of pseudoscience. I love that post. It's a very good post. And in fact, it's got some good engagement on that post. And I think I even followed up on that post with the actual article from which that graphic came. And it also goes along with what you were saying, Stacy, about how do you track down what propaganda is and how well it's founded? Like, do you look at the citation? Do you look at the evidence? Do you look at the supporting arguments? Or do you just say it because somebody's saying it loudly, frequently, you know, because that person is tall, because that person has money, because that person is attractive, whatever the reason is, versus the merits of the point itself. And all of this is wrapped up in systems thinking too. I still haven't really got a good understanding from anyone really about what systems thinking really, really means, because I see the word emergence almost always brought up in the first 3 minutes of systems thinking. But I don't hear a couple other things that to me are very foundational. I don't hear the word conservation. I very infrequently hear the word flow in systems thinking. And to me, those are very, very, very important concepts for systems thinking. So anyway, this whole area of critical thinking and all those subcomponents that I just mentioned and cited is something that I'm going to gradually try and lay out, propose, put on the table as something we may want to embrace. Over.
Yep. Fundamental ideas.
P.S. I got to let a dog in. I'll be right back.
When I graduated from the University of Nebraska, I was recruited by a recruiter at Bell Labs, and he was also from Nebraska. They would send out recruiters from the same school that you were attending. And when he recruited me, he says, "So we want to send you back to graduate school to study systems theory." And that was the first time in my life I ever heard the word systems theory. It wasn't part of the curriculum at the undergraduate level at the University of Nebraska. And he, gave me kind of a general concept of what he meant by systems theory. And in fact, that's what happened. I went back and got a master's and PhD in systems thinking, and then went to work in a company that is grounded in systems engineering, systems thinking, network planning. And it was a mecca of systems thinking, critical thinking, system engineering, scientific theory, research. And because it was such a mecca, I kind of thought, oh, this is just, where the world is today. No, it's where Bell Labs was. And it was a very rarefied local culture. And when I retired, not so long ago, went to Fidelity to set up my retirement, the chap said, "What was your profession?" I says, "I was a systems thinker." He says, "I've never heard of that before." This is a guy who's been doing intake of retired people for 40 years. I was the first person who ever said his profession was systems thinking. It's a very rarefied topic and accessible at the rarefied graduate level. How to introduce this to the general population? It's like art appreciation. I would be happy if I could just get to the level of art appreciation for scientific thinking. Never mind, because I'm not an artist. I'm not a painter. I'm not a sculptor, but I can appreciate people who are. I would like to see math appreciation, science appreciation, critical thinking appreciation, at least as a feature of a general public education. Here's our other systems thinker, Heiner. I'm going to let him in. He's in.
So I want to make an observation about the way we have conversations here. Sometimes I do invite Gail to listen in, even though she's not on video. And she has observed, as many of the rest of us have observed, that when there is an interesting topic that's posed, often that topic does not get followed up because we take turns. Everybody has a say. We just go on to the next person who has their hand up, which was already in their mind. The topic was already in their mind before the previous speaker finished. So we don't often follow up on what that previous speaker was saying, and that looks defocused. Those of us that are taking notes can circle back to those topics. And that, again, that circling back is a defocusing from whatever that, that other previous person, the next version of that previous person was saying at the time. So the way that we have adopted this kind of everybody gets to talk, everybody has airtime, everybody takes a turn, etc., is not particularly focusing. And I don't have a solution that's ready to put on the table, but I'm willing to put it on the table and say, do we think that that practice defocuses us? Because we could have said, hey, let's really figure out why Stacy asked this question and really look at the second layer of stress and really try and figure out where Stacy's leaning on that point. But no, because we take turns, we end up seeing that Stacy is annoyed And then, we have to circle back. So I'm just putting that out here and saying, could we ruminate on this? Could we possibly brainstorm on this? And could we possibly focus on this for, let's say, 5 or 10 minutes? And let's see, who has contributing remarks on this point, and not necessarily go and say, let's just take turns. So Alice, you have your hand up. Do you have a follow-up point on this particular practice / phenomenon?
Yeah, there could be a micro summary every 10 minutes. I mean, because people bring up so many topics and we lose track of the conversation, a micro summary every 15 minutes or 20 minutes, depending on the depth and intensity of the subject or topic that's being discussed, would be a good idea.
Well, okay, so I will say that Colin has tried to do that. He keeps track of what's going on in a conversation in a map of some kind, and he'll often show his map, less frequently these days, but he used to do it more, and say, okay, well, you were talking about this, but now we're talking about this, but at least he's got it mapped out. So he sometimes does that, and we just don't have a very effective collaboration tool around which to do this. So each of us has to kind of do it in our own way, it seems to me. I have years ago proposed, hey, let's use a shared thing that we can all augment and add to in real time. Something like an Etherpad, for example, or something like mindmeister.com, where we can all be typing into it, or even a Google Doc where we can all be typing into a Google Doc. But those suggestions don't seem optimal because, again, we've had this other notion called presence. So people view that when you're typing in the middle of a conversation, your attention is not on the speaker. I actually think that that's not necessarily true, but I've heard that critique. So if we try to use tools in real time, there's this issue of whether it impacts presence and impacts actual listening. On the other hand, I do think that without note-taking, without some kind of tracking, Colin calls it trail, then sometimes we lose that context. Does this observation / issue resonate with anyone else?
Yeah, this is an example of a meeting, and I have a friend at Apple Computer who uses the term meetingses in a derogatory, pejorative session, that meetings use up a lot of time and they accomplish very little. And I think a lot of our Zoom sessions, not just this one, but in general, are meetingses. And after they're over, you say, what came out of that? You go, not much. What was the takeaway?
Is that from Lord of the Rings, Barry? Meanings is?
I don't know where it comes from.
It sounds like Schmeagol saying.
Might be.
That could be one person's takeaway. I wouldn't say that that's everyone's takeaway. If that was everyone's takeaway, then I doubt that you'd all come back, week after week.
That's why Agile tries to have really dense meetings, no more than needed.
Agile is trying to do something different than what we're trying to do here. Heiner, welcome.
You don't think an Agile method could be used for certain things?
I think it could, but in context. Yeah, sorry, Heiner.
Welcome.
Willkommen Sie.
Ich komme aus dem Bus und gehe jetzt zur Telefonzelle und dann nach Hause.
What's a telephone zelle? A phone booth?
That's a telephone box. I will show you. This is our library box where you can
It
get
is a phone booth.
free.
Oh, pretty.
Oh, a micro library.
Yes,
Oh.
it's a street library.
So do you donate and often borrow from that library, Heiner?
Yes. Yes, we have it all over Berlin, and it's some take a book or bring a book or both.
Were you on a bus when you first connected?
Yes, he said he just got off a bus.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I'm Bruce. You know, we actually have that at our island library. There's a section right as you come in where you can actually put your books that you don't want anymore, or just take a book and optionally drop $1 in a box if you actually take a book, you know? So that's actually something our library supports. There's also something called the little pantry here on the island. A woman, Tiffany, very nice person, has set up a place where she's just put a bunch of food, and people come and contribute food, and other people come and, you know, take what they need. And it's just a very thriving little community. Nobody abuses it. And it's just a very remarkable thing she's done for the island.
We have the library boxes around my street, you know, but they're not big like what Heiner showed. They're just small boxes that you just bring a book or take a book. It's nice.
Okay, so let me possibly try and focus again. If there is an appreciation for focus, and if our current practice of always going in the order of whoever's hand is up can defocus us, I'm still wondering, how shall we address this phenomenon?
Better planning?
Planning seems to be a priori, right? That's pre-meeting. How about we do this in the actual flow of the meeting? How can we do that?
I don't know that you can.
I actually think we can. Let me suggest something. It may not be palatable, but let me suggest something. Can I suggest that when people's hand is up, that they actually say, you know, let's do something like bracket, you know, topic name, or bracket follow up on Stacy, or bracket, you know, I want to introduce a different topic, or whatever it is. That way, when we actually recognize someone and give them the time, we pretty much have some notion of what that person's really going to follow up on. And therefore, if there are 3 or 4 people stacked up and the topic was A, and there's 2 people ready to respond on A, but 2 people are going to do something else, maybe we prioritize those 2 people who are going to follow up on A to keep that focus. That's one suggestion.
That's the host model, right? The host, they say, okay. Our
Well,
next
that's a group hosting model where we don't actually have to have a moderator that actually does that.
Yeah, but that's the idea. Everybody's a host as
It's
opposed to.
it's a mutual moderation kind of model.
No guests, all hosts.
We could go, you know, full dictator mode and just say moderator gets to pick. I thought we were trying not to do that.
I find that when you have a good moderator, you don't need to be a moderator.
Well, that's Lao Tzu also. But I don't think we're there yet.
There's also the option of breakout rooms for when 2 people who want to ping pong and dominate, send them to a breakout room. We haven't tried that very much, if at all, but maybe we should think about letting people go off and have a private conversation, 2 or 3 people who want to dive into some topic that nobody else is interested in.
So I'm curious, is there such a feature so I can actually pick 2 people and just one click, send them to a breakout room and everybody else just stays here?
Let me see if I can.
Let me see if I can do that.
Yeah, at the bottom, towards the right, breakout room is one of the buttons.
Yeah, but doesn't that, how do you control that?
Oh, you can either have it random or you can select people. Assign manually, assign automatically, assign manually, let participants choose room. There's three models. So you can create 1 or more breakout rooms and then have 3 modes: a random, manual, and participant chooses. So you could create a breakout room for a given topic, and then people who want to talk to that topic would select that room. So the choose, let participants choose, you would simply name the room by subject matter. So this is just room 1. I'll go to room 1 and we don't know what it is. It doesn't have a name, but I'll click join.
Okay, so what I did was, just for the rest of us, I created a room with Barry and Colin. But it does look like someone actually has to accept the invitation to go. I can't just send them.
Well, it looks like they left.
Okay. All right. So I just tried closing those rooms, but they're not back yet.
They will be back
Oh,
shortly.
they'll be back in 50 seconds.
So Heiner has his hand up, but I'll go after him.
I'm trying to focus on this room suggestion.
Oh, okay.
So let's resolve this room suggestion, and then we'll go to something else. So, okay, Barry's back. So the room will close in 26 seconds. Barry, you're on mute.
Yeah, so Colin joined it and we just sat there waiting to see if anybody else joined. Nobody did. So then I left the room.
Yeah, so it turns out I can't, from what I can see, I can't force anybody to go to a room where they're banished. You have to sort of accept that banishment. On the other hand, so that doesn't seem to apply. Not the way we want it to, not what I can see at the moment. Okay.
Yeah, that I'm not sure of how that part works.
Oh, there's an option called automatically move all assigned participants into breakout rooms. So I can force them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I can also disallow participants to return to the main session at any time.
So you can become an autocrat and send people to sit in the corner, either by themselves or with somebody else.
Yeah, I bet you, this is definitely a way to get people pissed off.
But, I mean, people want to talk about sliders, have a room for talking about sliders and see who goes there.
These are different contexts force different sliders, is what you're talking about.
Okay, so that was an interesting experiment. Okay, so I'm not sure I'm going to exercise that option very often, and whoever's moderator can decide themselves how they want to do this. So I'm still curious, if a person wants to speak and puts into the chat their topic, with whatever syntax we want to use to indicate this is what I want to talk about, would that help us focus?
I think it would give you option of having subgroups that are focused on a defined topic in advance.
Okay, so you're combining that with a subgroup idea.
Right.
Okay, all right.
I'm going to say it depends on who us is.
Whoever's in the room, whoever's here.
I'm saying, and my answer is going to change depending on who's here at the time.
Right.
Because there are calls that I'm on where we wouldn't need that. And that might actually be a hindrance.
Yep.
Okay,
Maybe
so how would be a hindrance? Oh, go ahead, Heiner.
You see, this is remembering me of what open space is. And open space online, we had 15 years ago. And even only when in open spaces where you move around, someone is taking over, then we do our magic roundtables. In the worldwide open space community, we've been really doing worldwide session recently. And also our, not Doug, the Jewish guy.
Dove?
Dove, Saul?
D-O-V?
I don't remember. He was showing that we have the layout of all the breakout rooms.
Oh, yeah.
So you can even move your position from one place to the next to see. And all these breakout room technologies, we tried a lot. What I know from before, you had to be co-hosts to move from one room to the next and to see who is there and then decide if you want to join or not. All this is there since 20 and more years. And now we are talking about the same thing. Oh, wouldn't this be a nice idea? I think we have to update ourselves.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to do an experiment. I do resonate with that, Heiner, because I've been in physical open space. You know, we had a big room with 200 people with 20 tables, each with a sign on it with a topic, and people sort of go wherever they want with large sheets of paper, and you can always just take notes. Just whoever's there can take notes, right? And whoever then joins can see the notes that were already left there. Okay, so I've been there. I actually think that that's pretty interesting. However, I've just done an experiment, okay? I created 2 breakout rooms, one called Focus, the other called Free Form. I believe I've set the settings so you guys can go wherever you want and return to the main room wherever you want. I'm going to join the Focus room at the moment, and let's see what happens. Hey, Alex?
Oh, well, that worked for me anyway.
Okay, so you
The
were
others-
able to join.
The others were saying, just before I came in, they were saying, I can't find a button to join the room. So some of them might be using the version of Zoom that is not, maybe it's a browser-enabled version of Zoom and not one that's on their device.
Okay, let me go back there and see if I can make an announcement. I'll be right back, Alex.
Yes. He's back.
Okay. Oh, you're muted, Sam. When you come back from breakout room, you're automatically muted.
Did you come back or did we join you?
I didn't click join yet. In fact, I went away.
Well,
Sam, you're muted, Sam.
It
Okay,
depends.
all right, cool. So now we have
If
3
I-
people in the focus group. Good.
I-
Hey, Hunter, you saying?
I had to need some time to find it on my iPhone because the navigation is depending on the device.
Yes, yes. Okay, good. This is interesting because now this is at least one level of decision making where people could say, hey, I want to be here in free form format. And now these are people who opted to embrace focus. Oh, there's Stacy.
I
Okay.
have no idea what I did, but I tried to get other people here. I tried to assign them, but
Oh, you tried
You
to.
see-
Okay.
You see, I find it of interest because it says recording and it is a breakout room. Are all the breakout rooms recorded or just the one
No,
where the main
no.
house is in?
I suspect it's just the one that I'm in. That's what I suspect. But
Because
I
you're the one
didn't
doing the
join
recording. Because you're doing a recording,
Yes.
it records the room you're in.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
I
so
did
now at this
recording.
point, everybody has joined the focus room and there's nobody in the freeform room and there's nobody in the main room. That's cool. Interesting.
but that's my fault because I only sent people, I put everybody in this, I only send people invitations to come here.
Ah, okay. Ah, you're part of the instigation. Okay, got it.
Well, also, I found that I had to click the breakout room icon at the bottom to choose the room I wanted. It wasn't offered to me automatically. I had to go down and say, let me see the ones that are available. And I could have chosen any of them.
Okay, then it wasn't my fault. All I did is make sure that invitation went out.
Yeah.
Can you label the rooms politics, sociology, or creative art?
Well, right now, I just did this one experiment, focus and freeform. That's the only experiment we're in right now. Okay.
So can I just say something?
Yeah.
So I'm just speaking for me personally. Whether I go into a focus room or free form room, I don't care. I can speak to either one. I would be looking to see who's in there and who do I want to speak to.
Sure. Will everybody have their own set of criteria for how they choose?
I would say who's in the room is a secondary consideration on the topic. I'm more interested in the conversation and the aspects of the topic and the nitty-gritty of the subject matter than the people involved, the actual personalities are a side issue, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I was a privileged user as a co-host, so I didn't get an invitation. I had to select the room I wanted to go to, actively select.
So at this point, I believe each of you still has the ability to choose a different room to go to, right?
Yes.
Right. So I can return to the main room right now. I can go to the freeform room. In fact, I'm going to join the freeform room for about 1 minute and then come back. Hey, Josh. Okay, so I'm recording here. Now I'm curious to see whether the recording is continuing on the other break.
I'm just laughing. You're amazing, Sam. You literally created Clubhouse. You did it. This is exactly
Wait. Does Clubhouse have video?
without the video.
Right. Got it.
But you did it. Like you got it. You're on it. Keep going. I love it.
Actually, I tried Clubhouse for quite a while this past several weeks, and there's this notion of stage. Who gets to be on stage? Do you actually have to be like given that privilege by the club owner?
So moderator, you
Yep.
start off a room, you have the moderator. Now you can moderate people. And if you do, you give them the privilege to bring people up on stage.
Okay, so in other words, there's at least 2 tiers of people. There's people on stage, there's people not on stage in Clubhouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And then there's a third stage is the people with the moderator privilege.
Okay. All right.
And then you have all these other stages too, where you can allow people that are moderators to invite their friends, or people that are not moderators, they can't. So it's a private room. Blah 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 blah. Awesome.
So your video just went off, Josh. So now I'm in the main room and I'm going to join the focus group again.
Action is showing me something different. That's what would be useful for me. And that's all I could add to that conversation.
That's a good analogy. I can use that as pieces.
Thank you.
Okay, so when I was gone, I suspect the breakout room was not recorded, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Did it actually tell you recording has stopped?
Yes.
Okay.
The minute you left.
All right. Yeah.
It was nice. It was nice. I liked it.
What were you able to say now that you were not on recording?
I say the same thing whether I'm on or off. You should know that by now.
So then what makes it nice?
Not worrying about the repercussions. I can say it with no consequences. Either way, I'm going to say it. But
And
one
we
way
will-
is more relaxed.
For a few minutes, we were moderator free.
When you join a room, you should listen a little bit, not just.
You
try
can
to
always
take it.
choose to be moderator free. You can go to the freeform breakout room.
No, I'm saying when you enter a room, you should listen to see what's going on.
Yeah.
That's just unless there's something, like an emergency. So I think you were in emergency status.
Okay, so I guess we could try using this more. I mean, Josh has suggested it a number of times, but I just thought that, previously I thought, hey, it's such a rare event that we all get together that why take that very rare event and then split us all up again? But there may be some reasons that we want to put in play.
I think.
Okay, so back to this notion of focus. This thing could help us with focus. Some protocol around topics in chat could help us with focus. Some moderation could help us with focus.
And homework and advanced planning, agenda and homework. So that everybody comes to a meeting prepared to make a pre-thought contribution on some pre-planned topic, at least for a half an hour's worth or whatever.
Okay, true. And I do usually every week come with several ideas that always could be put on the table. And
Yes.
some of them get followed up, some of them don't. But that's just part of the way we play the game right now.
Yeah. I kind of like to think about something before I talk on it. Talking off the top of my head is generally not constructive for anybody.
Okay, so let me ask this. Barry, since you brought it up, are you willing to opt in to the practice of preparing 1 or 2 or 3 ideas and your own position on them going into every barn raising session?
Certainly, if it's a topic that I'm in a position to either think about afresh or have already thought about, and so I've got some completed thoughts that are reasonably prepared. There are topics where I haven't a clue. Like somebody says on the radio the other day, how is this thing in the Ukraine going to end? And the expert says, we know nobody has any idea how it's going to end. No predictions.
To me, wouldn't the question be more interesting than your prepared answers?
Well, if the answer is I haven't a clue,
Then the answer is yes, right?
I mean, I have nothing to contribute that's going to enlighten anybody because I'm unenlightened myself.
Right, but I'm saying maybe I don't have anything to enlighten people on regarding, Russian feelings on the war. But I still thought it was interesting that we all at least hear what this person has to say.
Oh,
So
yeah,
that's
no,
a
that's the
that's a
different story.
topic that we could prepare.
That's yeah. Am I interested in learning somebody else's well thought out or well prepared? Yeah. Sometimes if I don't know anything, I might be very interested in learning without having to contribute any expertise myself.
We can agree that nobody knows for sure how this thing's going to end, but we can offer our different opinions.
Wieso? Ihr habt mich Tracy genannt, sollten meinen Namen aber nicht.
Well, what was that?
Was that
Was that
I don't know
something
what
on
I-
Heiner's channel?
I wasn't watching for the green lines.
Okay,
I
so let me
think
ask
somebody's
this
there
larger
with it.
question. So I'm going to ask this not just specifically of Barry. Does anyone else here feel like they would like to embrace this practice of preparing 1 or 2 or 3 topics, either with or without a prepared position, going into every Saturday? I'm raising my hand because I do this already.
I had something today.
Okay, Stacy, Barry,
That's 4. I'm just counting 4 people with saying, yeah, it's 5, I think.
Alex. Okay, so that's Stacy, Barry, Alex, Colin, Alex. Wait, did I say that?
There's a thumbs up and there's a I want to talk hand. There's 2 different hand raises. The thumbs up
Okay.
means I agree and the hand up means I want to say something. So
That's all right.
necessarily-
Oh, is Caleb gone? Oh, Caleb's gone. Okay, all right. All right, so we have 5. Let me at least note this. That's Alex, Colin, Stacy, Barry, Sam. The others are not opting in. Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, may I then ask at this point, Stacy, what was on your mind?
Okay, so I'm always wanting to bring it back to us because I'm in the room with you guys. So I'm not really as interested in, like, none of us know what's really going on in Russia. I'm interested in the us part. So one of the things that's been on my mind this week is I'm always hearing Barry's make great art. And I've been thinking about that because, and I guess I've been a little frustrated because I'm starting to feel that part of the need for making great art is because as a species, I don't want to say all of us, but it seems we lack the backbone to say directly or to give directly the message that we want to. And so we have to make great art so that we don't have to sort of be responsible for it. And that led me to my next thought, because I was watching great art. I was watching a show, it's called Good Trouble. I'm really enjoying it. But one of the storylines is this young female engineer goes to work for a Silicon Valley company, and her boss, I mean, they're just assholes. And again, I believe it's reflective of real people. I can't be sure. So I'd love a conversation to know, like, do we know somebody like that? And when we're working in that situation, what's our role? Like, do we just ignore it, turn the other way? Do we privately give we all react differently. But my frustration comes from watching people on social media point their fingers at politicians and other powerful people. And I wonder, well, when you have a situation come up, what do you actually do? Because I've heard people say, I can't, I don't want to risk my job, or I can't. So again, I guess really where I usually get triggered is when I see either like a lack of consistency, or I get the message that somebody's saying, say as I do, not say, do what I say, not as I do. That for me, I have like this element of fairness that goes through me. And that's where I usually get like, oh. So what I was going to say was, have you ever been in a business situation where you saw somebody being treated unfairly or badly? And what, if anything, did you do? And if you didn't, that's fine, but at least let's look at why. You know, I mean, we all hopefully get stronger and do better as we grow. So I can definitely say for myself, there were times where maybe I didn't speak up the way I should have. Maybe I did something else to try to help, but I wasn't able to be direct. And I thought it'd be interesting if people could really be that vulnerable to say what it felt like when they were in that situation. To me, those things are helpful.
Okay, so just so I get it right, is there a 5 to 10 word tagline on this topic?
It's sort of under the theme of being the change.
Modeling the change you wish to see.
So then my question to the team is, would you like to focus on this as a topic?
Sure.
And with no dissension, I'll just take it as a yes. So if you object, please so indicate. I'll give you 15 seconds. I'm going to take Colin's hand up as previous, not in response to that question. Okay, so Alex, do you object?
I've got a question, because some conversations that are general in nature are okay to me, because I don't have the expertise to follow along with some of the people who go deeper. So, you know, that's the opposite of focusing, I guess. It's a generalized conversation. I'm a generalist.
Okay, but we're in a focus room right now, and Stacy has proposed a topic.
If I can just add to what Alex said, though, but that's sort of the beauty of what I'm asking. You don't need expertise because you're only talking about yourself.
So Stacy,
Yes.
I'm trying to understand Alex's point. Does Alex have an objection, or does Alex have an adjustment to the topic?
I think Alex
No,
has a concern.
This is an issue of focusing. It's one of the areas of debate that I like, but the point is, when it goes off on a tangent that's not an area in my specialty, then I'm out of focus. I get lost by the amount of technical detail involved. It's way outside of my field of expertise. I'm in the wrong lab. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're on the phenomenon of focus, not on the actual topic itself. See, is it okay? Let me ask Alex the question. Is it okay that in a conversation with N people, where N is more than 2, okay, that occasionally someone says something that we're not entirely familiar with, and that it seems to make sense to the others as part of the topic, as part of the flow? And is it okay that we try and say, okay, let me understand what that is, let me research it on my own, or make a judgment call and say, wait, I believe enough people here don't understand that topic that I'm going to interject and ask for a clarification on that one ambiguity. That's a judgment call that we all have to make, right? So is it okay that we actually adopt that practice? That we either decide to park it or we decide to interject. This is obviously not on the topic right now. This is a protocol.
You can end up in a silo because say the topic was a programming language, you'd automatically knock out about 80% of the people present. So, you know, that if people agree though, then if you know, the majority of the people present agree to do a mini micro focus on a point of contention, yes, by all means. Over.
Can somebody translate? I didn't quite understand the response.
An agreement to break the conversation and focus on a point of contention that somebody brings up. It's not well understood by the majority of people, then yes, that would be a great idea. But if it's something common that most people already understand, it's a side issue that where they should be in a breakout room. They want to talk about Python, for example. It's a breakout room for Colin and whoever else understands Python. Perhaps Barry and Joshua and Heiner. But I don't know much about it, nor does Stacey. Well, she might know a little bit about it.
No, I know nothing about it. And I'm in a lot of conversations with people that are smarter than me. And usually I'll just like listen and, you know, build my opinion as I go, check some things. And occasionally they get into software conversations. So that's usually where I'll like take my bio break, which I have no problem doing that. For me personally, it's not so much, I'm at the point, I don't want to be in conversations with people that are gloom and doom. So it has nothing to do with the topic. It has to do with the way they approach things. I want to be with people that are looking for better ways to do something and doing it.
Okay. So with that, I'm not sure we resolved it, but are we then okay now going to Stacey's topic of being the change, make great art? Good.
I think that's a good topic. Or appreciate good art if you can't make it.
Well, but actually, my point is under that because I was questioned. The value I was looking at was courage. Because I'm wondering if there's a certain piece of backbone that's missing. Like, I mean, art is wonderful. I'm not disparaging art. Art is great. It's wonderful. It's awesome. But sometimes when I've heard Barry say it, at least to me, it is sort of like when you can't do anything. And I'm questioning why they can't do anything. You know, so like if I can't address somebody directly, write a story. And I'm on, well, why can't I address them correctly? Directly. That's the part I'm talking about.
Are you looking for an answer now to that question?
No, it's more something to think about. I have my
Okay.
own answers.
Okay.
I've been thinking about this for, you know, this is just a continuation in the way I think.
Yeah.
But I think it's a worthwhile question. So my hope was to use it to be able to, for each one of us to look within and say, well, when have I been in that situation? When maybe I didn't say something, and would I do it differently now? And how could I do it differently? And specifically in the workplace, because I think like it just dawned on me that that's really where this change has to be made. And that's where people's security, their financial security is tied up in their workplace. And so that's when they're more likely to bend and not have that backbone because they're figuratively and literally, lives are on the line. Sam?
If I'm looking at this in perspective, to me, this sounds like a reasonably recent phenomenon that we can actually question ourselves and whether or not our values are in alignment with our behavior. I'll give you an example, right? Let's say 4,000 years ago, I'm a slave building some emperor's tomb, right? It's probably not in alignment with my human values, okay? And it's probably in direct opposition. I'm going to kill myself doing this. At the end of this, when the tomb is created, I'm going to be, shoved into a ditch and buried along with 10,000 or 50,000 others. So what I'm saying is that due to history and due to our evolution as civilization and societies and communities, this is, in my opinion, a relatively recent, privileged question to be able to ask. That are my values in alignment with what I must do in order to survive?
And
the point being, maybe look at this as a positive evolution and not so much from a standpoint of, oh, well, this person is being hypocritical because their values aren't in alignment with their behavior.
right, but now that we're able to do that, if we don't do that, then we can't be the change. If we just continue to not pay attention to our own hypocrisies, then how has this evolutionary skill helped us if we're not using it?
No, this is not meant as a criticism. I'm saying this, when looked at that way, this is actually a positive trend. That more and more and more of us are able and privileged to be able to ask this question.
Right, but it's only positive if we do it.
Well, I
Not
might be
just that it's in
naive.
theory.
Are you saying we're not doing this?
I'm saying we're not doing it enough. I'm saying some people are working really hard at doing this.
Yeah.
But most people are not doing it enough. No, and that you missed the point because it wasn't recorded. But that's what I said to Colin. The use case that I see for what he's trying to create is for a person to privately be able to monitor their own, behavior and say, and be able to see, is this within what I stated are my set goals and my set values? To really be their own, to be their own mirror. I think Sam's dealing with the dogs. That would be my best guess.
I was thinking about our projects and how in an open community, in a global collaborology community, we get our projects out on the table and invite others to get involved, see if they have any momentum. Some start moving and others don't, and we can use that feedback we get, but only if we have our projects out and open on the table, so we can get a bit of feedback.
But Alex,
I know a lot of us have got some projects on the back burner.
and I hear that, but again, somebody might have a great project and something that I want to be a part of, but if I don't feel like they're treating other people properly, I don't really want to buy into their project. That's not where I want to put myself and my energy. And unfortunately, the way we are in our society, we've turned our eyes to that. That's why somebody like Trump was able to get elected, even though he was mean and nasty. People turned their heads and they said, well, he's going to get the job done. Or, even like somebody like Chef Ramsay, who yells at people horribly, he gets the endorsements.
You've got a project on Colin's map, and I've never heard you talk about it or discuss it during one of these sessions.
I don't know what you're talking about. What project is it?
There's a sign on Colin's mind mapping, and it says Stacey's project.
Okay, so my project is me. My project is becoming. So what I do depends on what I see around me. What ingredients are in the refrigerator is going to determine what I'm making for dinner. So again, what I'm talking about now, that's what I bring with me. A way to get, connect to each other, whoever I'm dealing with, to really better get to know each other, to trust each other before I can take the next step of doing something more permanent with somebody.
Might have been that project of 18 months ago where you had 3 different messenger groups and that stuff.
I've had many different ideas or projects, some small, some big, but that's not where I am right now. Where I am right now in this moment is about, because for me at least, I recognize that all these other things, if we can't talk to each other in small groups of 6 and get that down, it's not scaling.
Right. So if we could get back to where Sam wanted to focus when he came into the room, we were in a conversation and he said 2 things, but I just feel like the tunnel for me has been bottlenecked today, and for you as well, Stacy. No, although you just got a lot out right there.
I got everything out I needed to get out, and if anybody wants more, they know how to contact me. And I'm
Feels
done
like-
trying to push that bull. What is it, Sisyphus? I'm done being Sisyphus.
Yeah, well, with what you just said, it feels like you were heard. I don't feel like I was heard. I feel like I'm being resisted instead of being asked questions. And you were the first one to actually do that. And you mentioned it earlier too. Why don't you ask questions and started telling people, it's one thing to have pre-diagnosed the problem and then dismiss people. And that happens too often. Obviously, what I'm talking about is complicated. So it's easily to pick it apart if you're not charitable. But you really added some nuance to it, Stacy, when you said it's about trying to better yourself and get that, if you could see sliders on, and that is a kind of an outcome over time, a memory. But essentially, you're hot miking there, Alex. Essentially, I think what you're after is understanding. Each different interaction has its own context. So there is no one system. There's how do you remember and follow through. So let's go on to the other topic. So again, my point was not about a first takeaway is finding out how to improve yourself. It's a longer term thing that you get. The thing that I think you would want to focus on with the tool that I'm building is understanding. Therefore, you need context, the premise, all the focus tools, depending on how focused you want to be. So there's several different types of meetings, several different types of moderators. You pick your breakout rooms or no breakout rooms, depending on what's going on. Also, you have different meetings between people who don't want to talk to each other, but they have to. Think of, what's going on in the world today, right? I don't know if people were forced to sit into the chair, and be as clear as possible with the tools at hand. You wouldn't expect someone to use a chisel and a rock today to write a letter. Anyway, but back to the point of focus, Stacy, you did bring something today, and it was something that you prepared, and you were not so much for today, but you were ready because it was something you were doing. And I found it very intriguing and interesting because of that. The way you approach the idea of propaganda and trying to eliminate prejudging and bias by saying, how do you change their mind? You said, well, that's not the goal. Exactly. The goal isn't to better them. The goal is to understand them and have them understand you. And that is focusing on the propaganda, which is the context of that conversation. How much of this stuff can we actually believe what we're hearing? It's nice when you can have a conversation where your facts are solid, let alone when you're, on thin ice. So different conversations, different ways to go about it. And I think getting ready and bringing something is good. And the last idea I had was it would be best for us, I would think, to kind of pick something going forward so that we know, like if I said next week, I'd like to bring a little bit more about my idea of conversation navigation and fair conversations, and have people say, well, you did a little better explaining at that time. and as opposed to just saying it can't be done. And then maybe somebody else could bring their project and give 15, 20 minutes. Or Stacy says, I have a new little social experiment I did, and I'd like to bring that up right now or next week if you want. Like, you know, so if we kind of have getting ready is what really works, as opposed to just being spontaneous all the time. But one thing I really like about this group, it is a bit of a town hall, and it is a bit spontaneous. So I wouldn't want it to get too strict. We can always do all the work we want when we turn the camera off, so to speak.
Alex?
When we've got enough people interested in our project to employ a coordinator, somebody who will do a presentation, I mean, that involves work, right? And if somebody wants to do work, they need a compensation unless they're volunteering. So, you know, presencing in these groups is part of the job, but also pollinating other people's hearts and minds with an idea and engaging them into the concept, so you get participation. That's the trick. Well, not a trick. That's the part of the process of presencing and pollination, I think, because, you know, some of the ideas are good and unselfish and they have values. Elba.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something really quickly about the idea of trust, because trust is a really multi-dimensional kind of word. So I don't watch Sean Hannity because I don't trust him. I don't trust anything he has to say. I might listen to Jon Stewart because I trust him. That kind of trust that I'm talking about is more about whatever I expect my interaction with somebody to be will be within certain boundaries of that. So I'll have sort of an idea of what I think their values are, sort of an idea of when they speak, how biased are they, how accurate is the, you know, how able are they to bear accurate witness. The only way I'm going to develop that trust when it comes to people I'm spending time with is really hearing who they are, listening to them share their experiences with me, how they've changed, what they have problems with. Without that, I'm never going to fully trust anybody. And I think, and not that I ever will trust anybody 100% anyway, but it feels like we want to keep skipping over that point. And I don't think it can be skipped over.
I don't even trust myself. That's why I'm a scientist. You seek peer review to determine if you've made a mistake that you didn't detect.
But you know what, Barry? So just as an example, I trust you to always tell me the truth as you believe it to be. I really do.
Yeah.
That's important.
Even if my working hypothesis turns out to be a misconception, which sometimes it is.
Right. There are other people, though, where I wouldn't necessarily trust that what they're telling me is what they really mean.
Yeah. And that's a feature of tact and diplomacy. You don't always say what you think. You modulate it with tact and diplomacy so that you don't irritate the other person and annoy them, so you can keep the conversation going so that you can eventually get to the point where you can be candid.
And that's where you and I split in the way we think. That's the part that I think we're making a mistake on. That goes to what I was saying about make great art. Because, so like, for example, in my conversation with the woman, with the friend, the pro-Putin friend, I never once I said exactly what I meant. I just tried to say it in the least aggressive way possible. But I still, yes, but you're saying that you don't say what you mean. I still said exactly what I meant. I think it's important, because if I don't say it, who will?
say what you mean versus say what you believe but don't disclose. Because you can have beliefs that you don't disclose. You hold them back. What you do say may not be terribly germane, but it's candid.
Yes. And I, go ahead, Alex.
Can I ask a question? Do you believe that what you hear and see on the mainstream media is agenda driven by some corporate sponsor or lobbyist?
Probably, but I'm not even speaking to that. I'm just speaking to the people that I interact with every day, because I have to be connected and join with those people so that together we can look at that 80% of agenda-driven media and decide together. But if I'm not connected to all the different people with all the different views, then it's just going to be a battle back and forth. I want to be able to connect on some point so that we at least trust each other so that we can judge something together.
My agenda is to get to the ground truth. Is that really an agenda?
It is an agenda, but there are better ways to get there. It is an agenda. Like, I like that agenda. I want to get to the ground truth too. I just disagree with the way some people are doing it.
Oh yeah. Obfuscation.
And by the way, that ties back to what I was when I was talking about energy, it's all related to that. Because if we looked at what we're putting into a conversation from an energetic point of view, it might help us to readjust how we're saying something. Because if somebody's coming on strong and hard, and then we come back strong and hard, that's not good. Yeah. So that's why I wanted to switch the language a little bit. That was underneath that desire.
Technical point, we're technically in one of the breakout rooms. We're in the focus breakout room, but we're all here. However, because we're in a breakout room, the live transcript doesn't work.
Oh.
Is it okay with everybody if I just
Yep.
end all the breakout rooms so we go back to the lobby?
Yep.
Close all rooms. We'll all go back to the lobby now.
So we all have to press. So we're just missing Heiner, who maybe because he has to press something on his phone.
Oh, it's automatic in a minute. If you don't, go ahead and confirm
Okay.
it. Let me just make sure that yeah, see, now I'm getting live transcripts again. I wasn't getting the live transcripts in the breakout room, and I was puzzled. And I finally formed a hypothesis. It's because we're all in the breakout room, which it turns out to be true.
So here's a question, Barry.
Yeah.
What is it you would like to bring next week?
The main thing that I like to bring is answers to open questions that are on individual minds or everybody's minds. That is my hypothesis is every day, everybody's ready to learn something. What are you ready to learn right now? Let's see if we can learn that. And if I can't get a good insight into what somebody's ready to learn, then maybe I'll end up picking a different topic that's, far afield from what they're interested in. But my feeling is, can I play the role of an educator or an education facilitator for individual people who have a frontier of learning that they would like to work on?
Yes, I've got a project where I'm trying to convince participants in the experiment to create a web page, a simple collection of links that they like, their favorite links, and that's a project that needs some input from good thinkers, system thinkers, and the like. Over.
So I was going to say that, well, actually, I think that we should think about when we come here, are we coming to give something or coming to get something? And that could be different. every week. So I heard Barry say he's coming to give something or to help or to, like, I heard, so maybe that's an in-between. What I would respond is, I don't necessarily know if I want to bring anything, but I know that if I'm here, the way I want to contribute is maybe to point out something that isn't the mainstream idea, or just sort of say, well, you could also, somebody else might look at something a different way. Another time I might want to bring something. I heard Alex saying he wants something. He would like us to do something to help him. So I think it's just interesting to know when you come in, if you're coming to ask for something, then own that. And if you're just coming to be of service, then make that clear. Sam?
Okay, so to directly answer your question, I'm here to co-create based on what my long-standing understanding of GCC was intended for. So I'm not going to regurgitate that monologue, but that's why I'm here, is to co-create. However, the events of the past week have also given me another thing, and this is potentially self-serving, so I'll admit it. There was a unblocking session that did get posted, and I saw a commentary, a very long commentary on that on that video. I don't know if any of the rest of you saw it.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, I just posted it in this link here. I was curious about your feedback on that commentary. And obviously it could potentially come across as very self-serving, and I am admitting it. But I do think that this is a fairly well-constructed, fairly detailed, fairly thought out commentary from someone. So I didn't want it to go unaddressed. So I'm just sitting here. You don't have to look at it now, but I would like for you to, look at it at some point and potentially give the commentator, Tia, or me, feedback on that commentary.
Is that the one you just posted the link in the chat?
Yeah, just now.
Okay.
That looks like the one where somebody was triggered by the word leadership
Yes.
or leader.
Oh, yeah, I read that. I
This
don't
is
think I know
the session from Glenn and Doug and me, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Barry, you were saying?
Yeah, that was from a woman whose name I wasn't already familiar with, but I vaguely remember what you're referring to now.
Now, in the interest of full transparency, I do know Tia. She and I have been in Palo Alto conversations since February of 2011. Okay, so I just wanted to be transparent about that.
Yeah. So you want from us a reaction to that thread? Is that what you're asking?
Well, because if you read that commentary, it is potentially viewed as quite one-sided. Now, I view this person as a reasonably objective person. So that's why I wanted to get your feedback on it.
Okay.
I got a feedback on the word leadership. It's to do with egos and military naval exercises. When you have a fleet, if you have a fleet of ships, you're concerned about preserving as many lives as possible after the voyage. Then the ship that the leadership is the one out in front, making decisions on how to avoid the bad weather. It's a common term in that respect. It's nothing to do with egos. It's about precision. It's about it's about tactics for survival for the majority. It's about unity and common causes, excellence, and all that good stuff.
And to be a little bit snarky, admirals are often at the rear of the fleet.
Well, leading from behind, which is sort of a cute metaphor, but leading from behind is actually a pretty powerful idea. Not the admiral in the rear of the fleet, but just the general concept.
The admiral could be down in a submarine.
Rarely.
So
Stacy?
to answer your question about, and I just briefly read through most of it. So I just want to say the first part, I really liked her suggestion that we talk about the word trigger and each say what it means to us, because that could be something helpful. To the second part, I remember because I did see this a while back, the only comment that I would make, which is always a concern, is that this person's making judgments based on the one video that she watched instead of the 3 years of conversations around this that have gone on. So we in the call have this shared memory that she's not exposed to.
I think she acknowledges that.
I don't know if she does or doesn't. I'm just telling you, that's what hit me, that, well, wait a minute. But
Yeah,
I did like,
believe in the commentary, she does acknowledge that.
again, she wouldn't, but even if, I mean, that's good that she acknowledges it, but she still wouldn't know what she doesn't know. This is not about her. I'm just saying it's
Agreed.
about, okay.
It's useful to know people's first impressions, because it tells you how you're coming across, which may, it may be that you're leaving an impression that you didn't intend, but it's useful to know that.
Right. Well, I mean, Sam, I shared with you one time, there was something that I didn't want put out there. And you said, why? And I said, well, it wasn't my best behavior, and I'm willing to share it with anybody that asks for it, because anybody that asks for it has the history and knows me. So there, that's important.
Yeah.
Okay, so this actually addresses your point about courage.
Yes.
And it opening up to blunders, publishing your blunders openly as opposed to hiding your blunders. This is a huge difference between two different classes of people: those who publish their blunders and those who hide them.
Right. And also, though, we have to be able to discern between courage and foolishness.
It may be foolish to publish a blunder.
What is the
Soon.
difference? Could you bring it up?
Say again, Sam, I missed it.
What is the difference between courage and foolishness? Since Stacy wanted to make that distinction.
Well, for me, courage is important if it can lead to something that can actually change things in some way. But to do something just to prove that you can do it is not courageous. It's just stupid.
Of course,
How do you make that judgment?
Of course, one way to own up to a blunder is to turn it into a work of art with identities, fictional characters, but the character makes the same blunder, and then it reveals it, but it doesn't say, oh, by the way, I was the role model for the blunderer.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I'm going to jump from one roof to the next to save somebody, that might be courage. If I'm going to jump from one roof to the next to prove that I can do it, that's not courage. That's stupid.
Yeah.
If I don't notice that somebody's bluffing, I'll be foolish to accept the contribution. But if I'm wise enough to accept, it's like you're playing chess. Even in chess, you can bluff with a move and make your opponent do something foolish. So trust, it comes down to trust, Stacey. You said it before. If the trust is there, you're less likely to be bluffed by the opponent. So you're more likely to make headway with your project or your agreements.
So then I would say that it is probably foolish to trust people that aren't trustworthy.
I'd have to agree with that.
And you continue giving people chances.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you have to earn. I don't know. I think you have to earn that. You
Because a lot of what I encounter
Yeah.
in untrustworthy behavior often can be traced to trauma.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is why, and that's what made me think about this whole no backbone thing. Because like I have two people in my life that made me think about this, and I love them. They are beautiful people. They are spiritual, they have big hearts. And sometimes I see them not in alignment with what, like rationalizing to themselves. I don't say anything because they're not asking me. They ask me, I do. And I wonder to myself, so what, like, what is it? And I still trust them, but I trust them to the level I know they're capable of. So it's a different kind of trust. I know they're not strong enough to maybe do something that would really show that courage, but they're still good people. But it takes a certain backbone that, and traumatized people don't have that because they've been traumatized. So I'm not judging them for that, but I'm recognizing it.
Have you noticed traumatized people get triggered more often?
Absolutely,
Yes, I've noticed that.
absolutely.
So I have to own my trauma because the traumatization I experienced, happened in two ways. Once was in the childhood, and then as an adult, there was a shock episode because of the alcohol damage I'd done to my own brain, not realizing how much harm I was doing. So that was a traumatic experience to have to endure on top of the childhood trauma. But we all have traumas in our lives, most of us. I don't know of anyone who's gone through an ideal existence of it.
So that speaks to the very beginning of the call, which when we were talking about, so stress, and then it's who reacts to the stress.
Yep.
So Alex, I can't stop to like help heal you of your trauma, but what I can do is when I see that coming out, in some way do something that gives you pause or gives you a minute, sort of like, like look over there or whatever it be.
Squirrel.
But yeah, and I'm not just speaking about you. I mean, there've been times where I've said something and somebody's overreacted and it was clear to me that they're coming from a place of trauma. That is not the time for me to tell them, you need to see somebody about this. You're not, that's just, and a lot of people do that.
It's not always wise to distract somebody when they're onto something.
Right. I'm not talking about distracting. What I'm saying is first do no harm. And to try to push you back would be harmful.
Sometimes you just have to walk on the other side of the street for a while, so you don't bump into people on the same side of the street that you're walking on.
Or sometimes you have to get out of the way so somebody else can get there who can do it better.
Yep.
Sometimes people will say to me, "G'day, Alex, how are you today?" And I will answer and say, "I don't want to talk about it."
So on this topic of courage and being the change, we've spent several minutes on this now. Is there someone who could actually summarize the takeaway? Do we have any new insights? Sorry, Stacey.
I was going to say, I can't summarize, but I can say what I'd like us to think about. I'd like us to think about how we can help the people around us because I feel like if we kind of share our courage, it makes it easier. So like when the first person speaks up, it makes it easier for the second person to speak up. And you don't want to do that with so much abundance that now you become the bully. So, it's sort of like we have to work as a team to moderate each other in a gentle way. And again, what makes people want to do that is the relationship of trust that we built with each other. That's the motivating factor as the way I see it. Because we care about each other in a genuine way, not because we're all being paid to do this job, so we're doing it. That's not the same kind of care or trust that, I'm talking about.
There are hard problems, including some intractable ones, and they include some that nobody's ever found a good solution to. So we struggle with intractable problems. And in that case, I think simply acknowledging that these are intractable problems is step one. And we don't have opinions as to the answer. We just have observations that they don't have good answers yet.
But are they the same problems that indigenous cultures face, or are they different?
No, I think they're a function of the architecture of the culture you're in. Every culture has an inherent architecture, practices, and they have shortcomings, they have flaws. And they're different from different architecture, different cultures. If you look at non-human living systems, tribes of animals or whatever, plants, they have different practices than we do. And they don't have the problems we have. They may have different problems, but.
See, to me, and I'll let Sam go because his hand's up, but to me, that means they're solvable. So I'm not giving up on that.
Well, yeah, you have to change the paradigm of of the architecture of your culture, which is not easy to do if it's a 5,000-year-old architecture that's got an inherent flaw in its fundamental design. Go ahead, Sam. I didn't mean to usurp you there.
Okay, just a quick reaction on that one. I don't think it's necessarily design. That, to me, is more emergence than design.
Yeah.
Okay, so the point I really wanted to bring, and this is a potential topic change, so that's why I wanted to ask whether there were insights we could summarize from the previous one. May I introduce a new topic?
Sure. Fine by me.
It seems like a lot of the war plus political discussion lately, meaning in the last 5-10 years or so, is really bumping up against this notion of freedom, which is, what is a reasonable notion of freedom? We see a lot of extreme, people misbehaving in Costco or Walmart. You see guns being toted into fast food restaurants. We see behavior against vaccinations and masking recommendations. So there's always this tension, it seems to me, between individual freedom versus the good of the community. And I think there are a number of those who tout individual freedom with almost zero regard, apparently, for the social impacts of it. And I would venture to say some of that is very non-systemic thinking because it doesn't scale well. So if we believe that good social behavior leads to good coexistence, then I'd like to pose the question, what is a reasonable notion of freedom? Over.
A reasonable notion of freedom is a freedom that is balanced with responsibility. All freedom and no responsibility equals some kind of chaos, I think. So responsibility to know that your freedom comes at a cost. Your freedom comes there's a price to pay for it, and that price is responsibility. Then your freedom is valued and worth the effort you put into respecting that responsibility. Responsibility to yourself and to others, to the community as a whole, and to the whole planet over.
There's a perspective on this that I take away from, of all places, fundamental physics. There's an observation in physics, and this, by the way, is due to an unsung woman about 100 years ago, that there is a direct relationship between conservation laws, which Sam mentioned before, and symmetry. That symmetry and conservation are two sides of the same coin. And if you have a conservation law, there's an associated symmetry. And to reverse that, if you have an asymmetry, that freedom for me, but not for thee, that's asymmetry, then some conservation law is broken. In this case, conservation of peace and equanimity. So if you want to preserve peace and equanimity, then you have to have symmetry in freedom, that if it's free for me, then it has to be free for thee. And if I don't want it to be free for thee, then I've broken the symmetry and I've also broken the conservation law. And I'm going to have a conflict. So that's one way to look at it, that there's a fundamental immutable law of nature. Conservation and symmetry go hand in hand. And if you think about it that way, that implies a limitation to freedom if it breaks symmetry and therefore breaks conservation of peace.
So I want to use an example that follows that, because I think this would be symmetry the way I see it. So there have been people that did die from taking the vaccine. Small number of people, it happened.
Right.
I respect the freedom of a person who's choosing not to take the vaccine. However, because of the rest of society that is dependent on not getting sick, to me, it's fine if they're willing to test. So I don't understand why it couldn't, okay, you're not taking the vaccine, then you must constantly test. Not I'm forcing you to take it, because forcing you to take a vaccine does not align with how I look at freedom. But I also care about society. So to me, there's a symmetry in not forcing people to vaccinate, but requiring that they take the test to prove they're negative. I see that as a no-brainer. I don't understand all these with the truck drivers and all that. I don't get it.
In your region, are students required to provide proof of certain vaccinations and immunizations before going to school?
Yes, they are. And I'm not speaking, you know, I can take the more, I can say why I think that there should not be a problem being vaccinated, but that's not what I'm trying to do. My opinion is, yes, you should be vaccinated. I got vaccinated. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to look for the symmetry like Barry's talking about.
In other words, there's choice, but then there's consequences of choice.
Right.
And if you agree in social health, social welfare, not the handouts, but the health of it, then you can say, well, you know, because of risk that I see, I choose not to vaccinate. But because of concern for social welfare, I will either remove myself and only engage in society as infrequently as I can. And when I do, I'll bring my tests, I'll bring, you know, maybe other protections, maybe facial or otherwise. But that demonstrates there's some notion of others' welfare as opposed to just, hey, my choice, my life, F you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just want to say one thing, Alex. I don't understand why the schools, because there was a lot of fighting in my schools. I don't have kids in school anymore. I don't understand why they just didn't have teachers and students that wanted a mask. And then the ones that were fighting masking go with the teachers that didn't want a mask. Like just like in that case, separate but equal works for me, because it's your choice of which side you're going on. You're not being forced to go anywhere. You're choosing.
There's an interesting example, this parallel to that. When the little girl Ruby Bridges integrated the school in Little Rock, they ended up putting her in a classroom by herself with the teacher by herself. So she got individualized instruction. And everybody else were crowded into a room with 25 students and one teacher. So separate, but it wasn't equal because she got a better education than the rest of them did. She got a
Right, but the
full-time
other
teacher to
thing is,
herself.
but the other important part why they're not parallel is she didn't have a choice.
True. But if you had a choice between a private tutor and being in a classroom with 2,500 students and one teacher dividing his or her time, would you rather have the private tutor?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is we had teachers in the school district that were anti-mask.
Yeah, put them in with
So-
with the students who don't want to have masks, and they're going to have a different outcome. They're going to probably have a less good outcome, both health-wise and education-wise, than the students who are in there with the teachers who are modeling good practices.
But it would still be their choice and they could change their mind.
Yeah, assuming that they live to change, have a mind and live to have one to change.
Alex,
Alex?
and then me.
I wanted to mention that that doctor on YouTube who keeps talking about the vaccine and the unvaccinated versus the vaccinated. And there were two schools of thought. One of them was that amongst the hospitalised, there was a percentage of vaccinated and unvaccinated, and one school of thought was saying that the majority of them were unvaccinated. Then there's another group out there that are looking at statistics, and they're saying that's not the fact. That's not true. There's a majority of the people being hospitalised are in fact vaccinated, double vaccinated with a booster or something. So it's odd and it's confusing, and I'd love to know the truth. Over.
Well, I don't have the answer to that, but there's some proxies we can use, and then I'll make my points. Okay, it looks like in those areas, maybe Florida and Texas and other areas come to mind, where people are choosing to be more lax with their mandates and recommendations. Didn't we see spikes in infection
Yeah, I think we did.
and death? So we have some data that could be used should you choose to look at that data. Okay, so that's all I'll say on that matter. The next one is, I actually just noticed, is it actually 10:44? Have we been going for almost 3 hours?
Yeah,
Yes,
I was
we
kind of noticing when you introduced a new subject after 1 o'clock, I wondered if you realized it was after 2 hours.
I gotta tell you, I thought that I was an hour off, okay? So evidently this has been going quite intently and I lost track of time. But speaking of time, don't we have a time change tomorrow?
Yes, we're going, everybody
We
in the
spring forward
US.
tomorrow, right?
Yeah, I believe Canada stays with US, but I'm assuming that Australia is completely different since it's not even the same season. But
Yeah.
everybody in the US, in the states that we're in, I think all the states we're in are going to go to daylight time in the wee hours of Sunday morning. And Alex needs to pay attention to what that means for.
It means logging in an hour earlier.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
And Heiner and whoever else is in Europe also, because I think they're off from us for about a week or two.
I think they're 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
My understanding is that Europe will go to daylight time in 2 weeks from this weekend.
Yeah, so it looks like twice a year we always go through this off by one
Right.
conclusion. Okay. So anyway, the reason I mentioned is I just got pinged by my CEO. He wants to interact with me. So I'm going to log off. You guys are welcome to go as long as you like.
No,
but,
I'm
gonna be
ready.
signing
I,
off.
I think we're done.
Okay.
Been fun.
Well, thanks for at least trying focus. I'm hoping that you're seeing that some focus might be actually beneficial and reasonable. Okay.
All
All
right.
right. See you guys.
Bye-bye.